Let's now focus on the Networks panel. And this panel is really interesting. It gives us lots of information to tell us how our web page is loaded into the browser. It shows us the sequence of all the different assets being loaded, the actual load times of the individual assets, and we can use this information to help optimize the front-end performance of our web pages. Now you'll notice when you open it up, there'll be nothing in there. And what we need to do is actually reload the web page. When we do that and we're on the Networks panel, it will then start profiling the actual load sequence of our web page and give us the information we want to look at. So to do that, all we need to do is hit the refresh button. Once your web page is fully loaded, then you can scroll down and see all the individual assets and have a look at all the different pieces of information that appear in this panel. Let's go through this panel, starting from the left-hand side, and just go through the individual columns and just have a very brief overview of what each column represents. First of all, we have the name, and that's pretty simple. It's just the name of the asset that's been loaded. We've started with our main web page, our HTML page, and then it's loaded in CSS files. And as you scroll down, you'll see JavaScript and things like that, and images. Next along, we have the method, and this is the method that the actual asset was loaded in by. So here we're using the get method. You may also see post methods as well. Next along, we have the status column, and this gives us information to show us if the asset was loaded in correctly or not and how it was loaded in. Now here you'll see I've got a mix of different codes. 200 means OK, it was downloaded from the server, but you see we got 304 saying not modified. And that's because it's actually used the cache version of this file that was sat on my machine. Now if we want to actually look at the profile, the network profile of all the assets being downloaded from the server, what we need to do is a hard reset. So instead of just normally clicking the refresh button, what we need to do is either press, I think on Windows, Control-Shift-R for refresh, Control-F5 does the same thing, or if you're on a Mac, try Command-Shift-R. So I will do that. Now the page is reloading from the server, making sure it's not going to use any of the cached assets, and now you can see it's loaded in and everything has been brought down from the server. Next along, we have the type column, and this just tells us the type of file. Here we have text, HTML file, CSS, you'll see JavaScript, image, and so on. Then we have Initiator. Now, Initiator is quite good if you want to know why a certain asset was loaded, or really how it was loaded. So here at the top, we have the main web page. So it says Initiator Other, and we actually initiated that by either putting the URL in, pressing enter, and it was loaded in. But then all the other elements, you can see it says parser. And what that means is once our web page was loaded, the web browser parsed each individual line of the HTML, and when it found, for example, this CSS file, whilst it was parsing the document, it realized it needed to load that actual file in. So it went out, downloaded the file, and loaded it into our web browser. So that's what the parser means. Next along we have the size, and that's the actual size of the asset. And then we have the time column, and that just shows us how long it took to actually load that individual asset. Then lastly, you'll see the Gantt chart. It shows us a timeline. And this is really nice. It's a nice visual representation of how all the individual files were loaded in for this web page, and tells us the sequence, how long they took to load, and so on. And there's a nice color coordination going on for the different file types as well. Now, each one of these columns can be sorted however you wish. So if we want to sort this whole loading by maybe size, all we need to do is click on the size column, and it'll sort all the entries that we have here by size. You can see it's starting at the smallest. So if we want to do largest first, give it another click, then it'll show the largest asset that we have embedded in our web page. So this is useful if you want to see which are the biggest files that may be taking a long time to load. And as you can see here, I've got an image, how to make a magazine. I think it's this one here that's 125 kilobytes in size, and it took 2.27 seconds to actually load in. So this may be something that I want to change. Maybe I want to reduce the file size to help the web page load even faster. And actually just looking, no, it's not that one, is it? I think this screenshot image here, that's that one there. The other one must be further down the page. Now, if you want to go back to the original sort order, I don't think there's a way to do it without actually doing the profiling of the page again. So if you turn off the tools, bring it back on, do Ctrl-Shift-R to reload it back up, and then we get the load sequence again. Now let's take a look at the Gantt chart. And I'll tell you what I'll do first of all. There's this button here which allows us to shorten the height of each individual row. So we can do that, and then we can see more on the Gantt chart. So the Gantt chart gives us a visual representation of all the load times of all the individual assets. And it shows us the sequence in which the assets were loaded. Now let's move along and have a look at the different colors and see what they represent. First of all, you'll see that we have this transparent pale blue bar here. And this shows us the request time and how long it took to actually load this asset from the server. When it started to get to a more solid color, that's when the loading in the browser actually started. So we waited 1.67 seconds before the asset was received by the browser, and then we can see it took 202 milliseconds to actually fully load in. As we move down the asset list, you see we got different colors, and the color codes represent the different types of files. So here we have blue, and that's representing a HTML file. So then we have green, representing CSS. And if we scroll down, you can see we have purple, representing images, orange for JavaScript, and then there should be a red somewhere representing fonts as well. Here we go, there's one. That's a font file. Now let's have a look at this thing here, this blue vertical line. And that tells us when the actual DOM, the document object model, the full web page was actually loaded into the browser, and when the actual loaded event was fired. So that's when the web page was fully loaded and the web page said, now we can start any JavaScript or something like that that gets fired once the web page has finished loading in. Then we have the red line, which indicates to us that the load event has been fired and everything on the page has finished loading. So that's the final sort of indication of when everything has finished loading onto our web browser. Back to the top. Now what we will do is have a look at the status bar along the bottom. Now this gives us some summary information showing the load times, and we can then determine if we need to optimize our page if it looks as though it's taking too long. Now you can see my web page here, it's taking an awfully long time to load. So what I should do is actually have a look, see if I can improve performance. But it actually gives a good example for this tutorial. Now one thing to sort of bear in mind that really for this status here, if we have any 404s or 500 errors, they would be the first things that we need to fix, because that means we can't find any assets and we don't need to be loading them into our web page. So we're actually wasting network calls. We're wasting requests going out to the internet to try and bring back files that don't exist. And then maybe you'd want to look at removing any unnecessary files as well. Try and determine if there are any JavaScript, CSS files or images that are actually not needed on the web page. You can also improve performance as well by trying to combine images into sprite maps and then use CSS to position those images on your web page. And then you've got the option of combining multiple CSS files into one file, the same with JavaScript, and then you could minify them as well to take out all the white space.